So now we're going to look at, now that we've looked at all the provisions or typical common provisions in an agent's agreement, now we look at what those provisions would be in a contract of sale. Okay. But y'all, again, don't try to memorize all the provisions in a contract of sale. But again, you better know what they are, each one of them, in case you are asked about any particular one. Y'all sound like somebody still needs to mute. So if you take care of that. All right. So let's take a look at them. Obviously, and again, this is the contract of sale. We have to identify who the vendor and the vendee is. Y'all talking about the buyer and the seller. Y'all, and by the way, y'all, especially from this point forward, you're going to start hearing a lot of terms ending in OR and EE. Vendor, vendee, grantor, grantee, leasee, leaseor, y'all, whatever. Yeah, and you got to know which one is which. Now in the book, I try to put out in parentheses. Vendor is the seller, for example. Vendee is the buyer. But on the state exam, y'all, they're not going to have anything in parentheses. So if for some reason you thought the vendor was the buyer, do you think you're going to have a hard time answering that question and getting it right? I promise you. So y'all make sure you know the difference. In fact, if y'all heard the rule of thumb, y'all, if this helps you at all, OR gives, EE receives. So whoever the OR is, that means they're giving something. The EE is receiving something. Y'all, for example, you got mortgagor, mortgagee. Y'all, the mortgagor is the one giving the mortgage. The mortgagee is receiving the mortgage, right? Grantor is giving something. The grantee is receiving something. So OR gives, EE receives. Hopefully that'll help you a little bit. All right. We also have to have a good description of the property. Now, I will tell you, typically, obviously that will include the address, but y'all, the address of the property is not the legal description. And you need to put the legal description in the house where, like lot 2, block 4, whatever. So have the lot, block, subdivision, all this stuff should be the legal description. You got to include all that in the contract. It would also include the tax map number. Okay. The contract's going to ask for that stuff. And by the way, if there's a blank, for example, if it says tax map number, it gives you a blank to put right in that number. Should you write in the tax map number? Yes. And should you ever, what should go in every blank?
Something.
Very good. You don't leave blanks blank. If you're not sure what goes there, that's what you got your broker in charge for. Go find out. But don't be leaving blanks blank. There's a reason it's there, and you got to provide that information. All right. Obviously, we must include the purchase price that the buyer and seller have agreed upon. That has to be there. And then it says we have to talk about closing costs. Obviously, when you get to closing, there's going to be some closing costs that are due from both the buyer and the seller. Seller owes closing costs, so does the buyer. Now, having said that, with very few exceptions, it really does not matter who pays for what closing cost, as long as somebody agrees to pay it. And this is what you need to understand here. For that reason, it is very common for a buyer, when they make their offer, they'll ask the seller to pay for their closing costs. Some of y'all have bought a house, maybe you have experienced that, or sold a house for that matter. Y'all, that's not unusual. So it doesn't matter who pays the closing cost as long as everybody agrees on who's going to pay for what cost. Sometimes we just agree, all right, seller, you pay your cost, and me as the buyer, I'll pay my cost. Y'all, obviously, you could do that. But if the buyer's going to ask the seller to pay for any or some or all of their closing costs, then you also have to indicate in the contract a not to exceed amount. In other words, it might say seller agrees to pay buyer's closing costs not to exceed, say, $5,000, or whatever. At least that way the seller knows, all right, yeah, I'm paying their closing costs, but I know it won't be any more than 5,000. Otherwise, it's kind of like asking that seller to sign a blank check. I don't even know how high this could be. I'm just agreeing to pay it. Y'all, who would do that? Probably nobody. All right, so that's the closing cost. We have to agree on possession. Y'all, when does possession take place? Y'all, when we talk about possession, we're really talking about keys. Y'all, when does the keys get turned over to the buyer? Because y'all, the keys represent possession. When does that take place? I'm sorry?
At closing?
Could be at closing.
Unless they have an early occupancy clause, or the other one where the seller stays longer. I can't remember what that one's called. But
well, and there you go. Y'all, you better make sure you read that contract. And for goodness sakes, make sure the buyer knows when they could expect to get possession. Now, I would think probably the most common time you would expect to be at closing. But y'all, some of these contracts might specify 24 hours after closing or 48 hours after closing. Y'all, if that's the case, you better make sure your buyer knows that. Y'all, if your buyer comes pulling up to the closing table, to the attorney's office with their U-Haul truck, and then you tell them they can't move in until 24, 48 hours later, uh-oh. Y'all, that means you're going to have overnight guests tonight. Right? And after doing that, y'all having those buyers stay with you for a night or two, you'll learn next time to read that contract. Y'all, the point is read the contract, because y'all, they're not all the same. So just be careful with that. Y'all, and I apologize for coughing. I don't know why I'm coughing, but I am. But anyway, you're always going to see this clause called, or provision called, time is of the essence. Now, y'all, I suspect they'll probably ask you something about this on the state exam too. And by the way, just because I don't say, for example, possession is something they ask about, y'all, it doesn't mean they won't ask it. But when I've had a lot of people tell me they ask about certain things a lot, then I'm just trying to help you out here. And one thing I know they like to ask about is time is of the essence. And y'all, basically, that's a provision that sounds just what it might sound like. Y'all, you're going to have a lot of timelines throughout the contract. Where basically buyer has to do something and it will specify a certain amount of time they have to do it. Same thing with the seller. You got to do certain things, and it specifies how much time you have to do it. Y'all, when you see these timelines in the contracts, y'all, this is not a suggestion. If you don't get it done, whatever it is, if you don't get it accomplished within the time frame stated in the contract, basically, because time is of the essence, that means you've now waived your rights under whatever that provision was. So, y'all, just for example, the buyer, at least in our local contracts, it says in the contract, buyers, you have a 10-day due diligence period. So basically, you got 10 days from the time we ratify this contract to have any inspections you want to have. Y'all, home inspection, termite inspection, heating and air, y'all, whatever. You have 10 days to get all this done. And if there are any issues with it, then you can, obviously, y'all, if they find things that need repaired, things need to be fixed, replaced, whatever, then you'd have to submit a repair addendum to the seller and tell them, say, these are the things we found wrong and we want you to fix these things. Well, the contract says you've got 10 days to get all that done. Well, after that 10th day, if you have not submitted that repair addendum, too late, buyer. Time was of the essence. Y'all, they didn't say you got 10 days just for the fun of it. You miss that timeline. That means, buyer, you're buying that house as is, or you're going to be in default and liable for damages. Y'all, hopefully, I hope you can see that, y'all, you mess around and let that ball drop while it's in your court, and something doesn't get done in the time allotted and your client's rights get waived, you're going to have a problem here. Now, y'all, here's where I think you got to be careful where what I think they're trying to do on the exam. If somebody does not meet a timeline, does that mean the contract is terminated?
No.
No. Y'all, don't let them do that to you. Y'all, so just because we missed a timeline, that does not terminate the contract. What does it do? It waives your rights under whatever that provision was, right? Means you cannot take any actions. You're out of luck. You're just stuck with whatever you got now. So just be aware of that. Y'all, the next thing you'll see in the contract, there is a provision that deals with personal property and fixtures. Y'all, again, we talked about this earlier, but make sure both the buyer and the seller are on the same sheet of music. Everybody agrees on what's included with the sale, what's not included. And, you know, and again, if the buyer's asking for anything that would be considered personal property, and assuming the seller's willing to leave it, what must you write up personal property on?
A bill of sale.
Bill of sale.
The bill of sale. Very good. All right. We have to identify the financing provisions. In other words, buyer, when you make your offer, you got to write in the contract, what type of financing will you be using? Is this going to be a conventional loan, FHA, VA, USDA? Again, there's all kind of financing, but the seller has a right to know what kind of financing you're using and what the terms of that financing will be. All that has to be in the contract. And y'all, I'm just telling you, don't be trying to make stuff up because this stuff matters. Y'all, if you put conventional loan in that offer, you better make sure your buyer qualifies for a conventional loan. Because if they show up to closing with an FHA loan, technically and legally, can the seller now claim the buyer's in default? Because you said you were getting this type of loan, but yet you showed up with this type of loan. Y'all, that could be a problem. So, y'all, obviously, before you start making offers, might you want to talk to the lender and make sure you know what your buyer is qualified for. That's the point here. You'll also see a provision dealing with the condition of the property. And y'all, really a couple things here. Y'all, obviously, does the seller have to disclose to the buyer the condition or known defects with the property?
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. Y'all, in fact, talked about that hopefully when was it, the other night. But then also, y'all, basically what this provision is saying, seller, you must maintain the current condition of this property from the time it goes under contract all the way through closing. Y'all can see what'll happen a lot of times. Y'all, in fact, we just said, buyer, you got 10 days to do your due diligence, have inspections and so forth. Let's say we got all that done, everything's good. And say we got 2 more weeks left between now and closing. Well, y'all, is it possible, say the heating and air unit goes out within that 2-week period? And the buyer would not know anything about it because we've already done the inspection and then later it breaks down. Well, does the seller have to repair or replace that heating and air unit? They do, according to the contract. They have to repair, because the contract says you got to maintain the current condition all the way through close. So if something breaks, seller, you got to fix it or replace it, whatever it needs to take place. Get it done. Goodness. All right. If there's any covenants and restrictions, like an HOA, homeowners association, the seller has to furnish a copy of the covenants and restrictions. And quite frankly, if there's any deed restrictions, that also has to be provided to the buyer before you enter into the contract to sale. Okay, so seller, if you're the listing agent, make sure you get these documents. If there's covenants and restrictions, get a copy of it, because that buyer, they got a right to know what they would be agreeing to if they buy this property. So they have to see it before they make the offer. Only makes sense. This next provision deals with the risk of loss or damage. And basically all that's saying is this: seller, you're responsible for any loss or damage to this property from the time it goes under contract all the way through closing. You're responsible and liable. Once we've closed, now all the risk of loss or damage reverts over to the buyer. Something happens after we close, buyer, it's all yours now. So obviously, do we want to make sure we have insurance in effect all the way up until closing, through closing, and after closing? Be a good idea, I would think. The next thing you see here, it does, the contract must stipulate the type of deed that we use to convey the property. And then right below it also talks about marketable title. Obviously that has to be included in the contract, but I'm not going to get into right now the different types of deeds and so forth. That's going to be in I think that's chapter 9 or something like that, but that's coming up later. We'll actually break down the different types of deeds, but for now, just know that the contract must specify what type of deed will be used to convey this property. That's all they're talking about there. There's a provision that deals with default. Y'all kind of talked about that already. But if either party is in default or breach of contract, then the other party could obviously seek remedies, damages, if you will, for that default or breach of contract. More times than not, it's just going to wind up being whatever the earnest money is. Remember, that's the liquidated damages. But more times than not, that's about as far as it goes. All right. The next thing is talking about the death of the parties. Now, here's where we got to be careful. Again, let's say, the house is under contract, but the day before closing, the seller dies. What's the status of the contract? And I would just actually don't answer that. I don't want you to. That contract is still binding. It is binding on the seller's heirs. And I know somebody else said, well, no, I thought you said earlier, death terminates the contract. That is not what I said. Remember, we said death will terminate an offer. And again, remember, don't get these confused. Don't get an offer confused with the contract. If the seller dies a day or a few days before closing, hasn't the seller already agreed to sell the house and what the terms of the sale will be if it's already under contract?
Yes.
Yes. So assuming the buyer still wants that house, can they still go ahead and buy the house even though the seller has passed away before closing? Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely they can. So y'all just remember, if we're talking about the contract and the seller dies, that contract's still binding on the seller's heirs. In other words, could say the seller has children. Could the children now come back and say, well, you know what? I know dad agreed to sell this house to you, but now that he's died, now that he's dead, we've decided we're not selling the house. So the deal's off. Can the heirs do that? No, because dad already agreed to sell it. If the buyers want it, they can buy it. Now, obviously, if the buyer dies, it's over. If the buyer dies, then there's nobody left to buy the house, right? So if they ask you something like that, just think about it from a logical perspective, and it shouldn't be too hard to answer the question. Okay. All right. There's a provision in every contract dealing with FHA and VA loans. And basically what this provision says is this. The buyer and seller, assuming we're using either FHA or VA financing, the buyer and seller will have to sign an addendum that will be included with the contract. And basically what this addendum says is this, that the house must appraise for the actual sales price or more, or the lender's not going to loan the money. Now, I will tell you that's already a contingency. That's an appraisal contingency that's already in the contract. Already says that. But because this is the government, they require more paperwork that basically says the exact same thing. So it's just saying that you got to sign the addendum. The house must appraise for the sales price or more, or we're not loaning the money. Then it talks about earnest money receipts. This is kind of a no-brainer, even though I rarely ever see or hear this happening. But if somebody gives you earnest money to go with their offer, which typically most buyers will offer some amount of earnest money, should you provide a receipt back for that money you just received from them? Yep. That's a no-brainer. But I'm telling you, I don't understand it, but I don't think most agents give receipts. You got to give a receipt. Proof that you've received money. Hopefully I'll get through this section. All right, but we got to have signatures of all parties. We know that. And if there's any contingencies, for goodness sakes, don't forget to list the contingencies if there are any. And I will tell you the main one they're talking about here. Is it possible the buyer would like to buy the house, but they can't close on that house until they sell their house? I'm telling you, that's very common. So basically, the buyer will go ahead and make an offer. Here's what we'll buy your house for, but we cannot close on your house, seller, until my house sells first. Hopefully that makes sense. Well, that's called a contingency. So basically, the contingency is, seller, I'll buy your house. Here's what I'll buy it for, but our offer is contingent on my house selling and closing, and then I'll close on yours. So the seller could agree to that, and they may not agree to it. And I will tell you, in a big time seller's market, which we happen to be in right now, unless that seller really likes that buyer, I don't see, they're probably not going to accept the offer today with that contingency. So just keep that in mind. But if you forget to write that contingency in the contract and that seller accepts your offer, that means your buyer is going to be stuck with 2 house payments. I hope that's not going to be a problem, because it is what it is at that point. But then this last provision you see here, this right of first refusal. And here's why this is a big deal. Say the seller accepts the buyer's offer, even though the buyer had a contingency that they had a house they had to sell first. They accepted the offer, but then say the next day the seller gets another offer from a different buyer, but this buyer does not have a contingency. They said we can go ahead and close now. Well, can the seller now sell the house to the second buyer? The answer is they can. And I know you're probably thinking, well, didn't you say once the seller accepts an offer, that conveys equitable title to the buyer, where now they cannot accept another offer? I did say that, except for when you have this contingency in your offer. If you put that contingency there, equitable title does not convey. So basically what the seller's agreeing to here, they're saying, buyer, as long as you can sell your house and then close on mine before somebody else comes to buy it, we're good. But I'm not just going to sit here holding my house for you, waiting on your house to sell, right? So the seller could go ahead and accept another offer if that your buyer has a contingency. But if you're that first buyer and the seller decides to sell to somebody else, would you want to know that? Would you want the seller to let you know they're selling to somebody else now? Yes, you would. Well, the only way you can force the seller to come back to you and let you know about it is to include in the contract what we call the first right of, the right of first refusal. And basically the way it would read is this: seller agrees to give buyer, for example, 48 hours first right of refusal. And what that means is, assuming the seller agrees to it, seller, if you do get another offer with no contingency, you have to come back to me first and let me know that you now have another offer. And then you must give me 48 hours to remove my contingency and buy the house myself. Or if I don't or cannot do that within the 48 hours, then you can go ahead and sell it to somebody else. Does that make sense to everybody?
Can you explain again?
Explain how, what, all of it again or what?
No, about the right of first refuse.
Yeah, it's just saying, seller, you have to come back to me. Y'all, and that doesn't have to be 48 hours. That was just, but that is common. You'll see that a lot. Where basically says, seller, you have to let me know, assuming I'm the first buyer and I have a contingency about selling my house. Go ahead and get back on mute while I'm explaining this, if you will. But anyway, so if you get another offer, then you got to come back to me and give me 48 hours to either remove my contingency. And obviously, if I remove my contingency, that means now I'm going to now go forward in buying your house, even though I have not sold mine. Now, everybody may not be able to do that, right? Well, I can't afford 2 house payments. Okay, well, then don't do that. Then you would have to just tell the seller, well, I can't remove the contingency because I cannot afford 2 payments. But after 48 hours, they can still go ahead and accept the offer from the second buyer. But at least what that does for you is to let you know you need to start searching for another house, right? They're letting you know then we're selling it to somebody else. But I did let you know that if you don't buy mine, then I'm selling it to somebody else. Okay?
Yep.
Any questions about that?
No.
All right. Let's see. So no questions. Everybody good there? Very good.